Ready to go? Okay, everybody, good evening. It's just gone 7 o'clock, so we'll start the meeting. Tonight's meeting is hybrid. We should have Councillor Haley on, who can't make this evening, but she should be joining us at some point online. And of course, we're being broadcast on Zoom as usual. So we'll start off with item 1, apologies for absence and substitutions. We haven't got any, which is great. Item 2, declarations of interest. Does anybody have any interest to declare? No? Good. Great. Item 3, matters to be considered in private. We haven't got any, which is good. And then item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of October 2023. Quite long minutes in the agenda. Everybody happy to agree them? Thank you very much. And now we'll crack on to the substantial item of the agenda tonight, which is Broadway Living. And we're going to invite Peter George, Strategic Director for Economy and Sustainability, to introduce the item. Peter, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And good evening, everyone. For those of you who've not met me, been here about 7 or 8 months now. Was expecting a couple of colleagues to join as well. If you could maybe Teams them, Sam, whilst I go through the presentation. So hopefully everyone's had the opportunity to review the report, and this presentation just provides a bit of a summary of the report, after which I'll be very happy, as well as Philip and Jose, who I'm hoping will join the meeting to answer any questions. So the presentation and the focus is to really review where we are with managing and mitigating risk associated with Broadway living. This is coming at a time where we've got quite a bit of work underway, carrying out various reviews of Broadway living. So where we are very much reflects a point in time. So the report notes these 3 implications around changes to Broadway Living's business plan, which reflects the harsher economic climate, which I will kind of expand on. It notes, as I'm referring to, that we're in a process of reviewing Broadway Living within the context of the council's overall kind of housing development plans, and in particular, the council's commitment to deliver 4,000 generally affordable homes by 26. So the review of BL is being conducted within that context. And also the report notes various reviews and policy work streams going on. So this slide just provides a summary of progress to date and the journey that the council has been on with Broadway Living since 2014. I think it's really good achievement in 2020 to have a registered provider subsidiary to the Broadway Living company. So there's a summary there of homes that are already under management, but members will note the trajectory in terms of how we're looking to increase the number of homes based upon developments that are on site. And then the council secured around £109 million grant funding from the GLA in order to deliver affordable homes, of which 10 million was allocated to Broadway Living. So kind of moving on to kind of the focus, some of the challenges that are being experienced at the moment. So some of this will be familiar to colleagues. So firstly, since going back to origins in both Brexit and the pandemic have really contributed to high levels of inflation. And I guess a good example as to how this is impacting the kind of development industry is, you know, a large proportion of construction members of the UK workforce were actually EU nationals. So a combination of Brexit, and then when the pandemic also then hit shortly after, a number returned and home to their native countries, but didn't return back when the pandemic was over. So I think all will be familiar with supply and demand as the construction workforce has shrunk over the last few years, and demand for development has stayed steady. It has resulted in wage increases for construction workers, which trickles down and impacts the overall cost of building homes, and therefore the viability, and therefore where the council own land, it will directly impact capital receipts that we're getting for land. But it wasn't just construction workforce. Materials really shot up, particularly during the pandemic. You know, steel, for example, at a point in time was kind of went up by 20% compared to where it was. So it's just an example of how some of the kind of the big construction components were really going up in price. And what has happened since then is a number of them have leveled off, not really come down. But the key kind of determinant of the viability between projects is the differential between construction costs and property values. And what we've all experienced is costs going up, but values being volatile. But more recently, I think we've all read about house prices coming down. So you can understand the kind of the pressure where you've got rising costs and a soft housing market, how that puts pressure on developments and on what's viable to deliver. We also, as we've all seen, have left quite a longish stable period of low interest rates to a place now where interest rates are around 5%. You know, that really impacts the money that can be borrowed to fund developments, and therefore, again, it impacts viability. And what we mean by inadequate grant levels, so, you know, as I said, we got 109 million, which is a really great allocation. But within that, we can only spend so much of that money per home on social homes and so much on shared ownership. But those grant levels remain pretty steady, whilst the cost of building homes has gone up. So that's what that point is making there. So what are we doing about it? What are some of the mitigations that the council is working on? So these bullet points talk to some of these. So firstly, we've looked to introduce a gateway review process. So this is in the process of implementation. What this is about is having a far more regimented process that all development and construction projects have to go through in order for them to receive additional funding from the council or from Broadway Living. So just to put more kind of rigor, tests, challenges, controls into the process. Hurdle rates reviews, what that means is we're doing a piece of work looking at how we define what's viable. So, you know, it considers, for example, what's viable in terms of a payback period, what's viable in terms of looking at things from a net present value perspective. But what it crucially does by having hurdle rates, as the terminology implies, if you're not able to surpass the hurdle, then the project won't proceed. So I think by implementing this approach, and this is looking to be captured in the cabinet report that we're bringing forward early next year, it will protect the council by ensuring that projects are only proceeding where they are demonstrably viable against hurdle rates which are being developed in partnership with the Section 151 officer to ensure that they're prudent. Housing revenue account general fund capacity reviews. So this work's underway at the moment, and in particular with the housing revenue account, it's looking at the capacity for the housing revenue account to be able to support and fund the development of new housing. And councils are in a similar position to housing associations. So housing associations have got a number of investment demands they've got to respond to. So I'll give you some examples. Firstly, they have to be thinking about investing in their stock in order to improve the environmental performance. So there's quite a significant retrofit program going on amongst housing associations. They have to respond to changes in building regulations arising from Grenfell and addressing any cladding issues. They also had to address damp and mold. Those issues are not unique to housing associations. The council housing stock also can have some of those issues. So where investment is switched, our ability to, the council's capital investment within the HRA is defined within the context of an overall business plan. So where we spend more money on investing in additional stock, it will therefore create less financial opportunity to invest in new developments. So that piece of work is ongoing at the moment, and that will also expect to be concluding early in the new year. And then finally, it's the more comprehensive review of Broadway Living and Broadway Living RP. And we're at the stage of having undertaken an options appraisal, looking at the future of Broadway Living. And I want to be absolutely clear that it's not an options appraisal that by any means has got is any mean predetermined. So I don't want any member to interpret carrying out an options review on Broadway Living as council officers preparing to look to no longer continue with Broadway Living. That isn't the intention. Broadway Living's been in existence for some time, and I think it's right in the midst of a housing crisis and challenging economic times that we just take stock of the performance of Broadway Living and the RP, and we reflect upon its role in delivering our crucial 4,000 generally affordable homes target. So that's the motivation for carrying out the review. So I've recently appointed a man called Oze who's joined. So Oze's role is to reporting to me, provide that independent assessment of Broadway Living. So he's fulfilled a similar role for another London borough, and I brought him in to carry out the options appraisal, look at the relationship between Broadway Living and the council, and make a series of recommendations once he's carried out that review. So Oze's will be available to talk to his experience and answer any questions on his initial reflections. We also have Philip Brown, who's the council's Director of Development, and Philip has been leading the council's development program for the last 4 years, but has also been working on supporting and providing services to Broadway Living. So hopefully that was helpful as an overview, and happy to answer any questions, or for Philip and Jose too.
Thank you very much, Peter. So do we want contribution before we go to questions? Do we want Jose and or Philip to make some remarks? So is that the idea?
I think it would be helpful.
Yeah.
So I think Jose's just come on the screen.
I'm happy to say a few words, Chair.
Lovely. Thanks, Jose. Thank you. Over to you.
Can you all hear me? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Right. So I've been with the council just under a couple of months. My background is 40 odd years in social housing, primarily working for housing associations for the first 30 years of my career. And since 2009, I've been a mixture of interim leader, working for a number of councils and housing associations, and also have done a number of consultancy roles. So I was very delighted to receive the invitation from Peter to support your council on an interim basis, to look at your development activity. And first impressions that I'd like to share with you is that the council delivered and has got a very ambitious development programme that started way back in 2016, and quite unusual for a London borough to deliver the number of homes you delivered up until 2023. And just to echo Peter's comments about the need now to take a bit of care, given what's happening with the sector, and the need to look again at how you organise development going forward. And that's been very much part of my initial piece of work. In terms of the schemes that you've got current allocations for through the Greater London Authority, through GLA, it's clear that there will be viability challenges, given that the council is going to have to put down some clear hurdles for those developments to be considered viable. So the kind of things we're looking at is, can those schemes be organised differently? Can the tenures be changed? Can you look at the ways in which those schemes might be structured in terms of where they sit? Do they sit within the council? Are they better sitting within the council? And what does that mean for Broadway Living and Broadway Living RP, given the kind of hurdles that need to be met? So the work that we're doing in terms of looking at gateways, looking at the hurdle rates, looking at viability, will all feed into the review that will follow in terms of the housing companies. One of the things that I've done in the first few weeks is get around and meet as many staff as possible that are involved in the process. I've also had several meetings with the chairs of both Broadway Living and Broadway Living RP to get their perspective on how they see things. There's a clear ambition to deliver more into both the RP and into Broadway Living, but I think there's a realisation that it has to be done in a controlled way. And the options paper that I prepared for Peter, which is a very high level options paper, has a range of potential options for how the council might work with Broadway Living to change their business models, given the current economic climate. So the kind of things that might be discussed is perhaps looking at Broadway Living to see whether they could perhaps do a bit more around the delivery of temporary accommodation, which I know is costing this and lots of other councils lots of money. Could that be a way that we could perhaps deliver more using the general fund to help develop through Broadway Living? In terms of the RP, could we deliver more, perhaps different alternative tenures, such as shared ownership? And all those options need to be modelled. But the first stage of the appraisal process is for the leadership of the council to consider, the officers to consider the options that I put before them, and then for us to spend a bit more time looking at each one in detail to see whether they're viable or not. And a critical part of that process would be to work with, as Peter has suggested, with the finance teams, with the legal teams, as well as with the chairs of Broadway Living and Broadway Living RP. I've also had quite a long discussion with officers within the development team, including Philip, who I know is on the call. And yeah, I think everyone's trying to grapple with the same challenge of delivering as much as the council can in what, as Peter has outlined, is quite a difficult climate for developing local authorities. So I hope that gives you a scope of the kind of work we're doing. More, I think, will emerge in early 2024. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Chair.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Jose. Philip, did you want to say a few words?
I'm just starting my video and my there we are. I can see myself.
Right, we can see and hear you well. That's good.
Thank you. So my history is that I've been in the council since 2019, and I have taken Broadway Living RP through registration and led the creation of the much larger development team to deliver what was originally 100 million of grant in the 2018 to 22 programme. But as the report says, that programme was extended, and we managed to secure over 100 million in grant in the programme to March 23. But we did, and councillors may remember, need to move some of the schemes that were part of the Broadway Living programme into the HRA during the latter part of 2022, because the viability concerns had become apparent even at that point. When the grant was secured in 2018, it was a very different world to what we faced in 2022. Of course, we'd had the pandemic and the lockdowns, we'd had the increase in inflation, and we'd had the rise in interest rates, and all of those things impacted on the ability of Broadway Living RP to deliver the projects within its business model. There was a business plan for BLRP, which was approved by Cabinet in November 20, and there was a business plan for Broadway Living Limited approved in February 21. The model relied on the duty of staff from my team into Broadway Living Limited, and for it to provide development services back to the council. But that model became unviable during the period I've just talked about. And so there is really now a need to change the business model, as Jose's alluded to. One thing that may potentially be of use is the conversion to a community benefit society. That's something the BLRP board has considered, and that would really help in taking tax out of the business plan, because as it stands, BLRP pays corporation tax. So that may be something that is in the final draft report to consider. And just to then say that we have over 100 million of grant to secure, but time is tight because we need to start these projects by March 2026. Although it's still 2023, in development terms, if we haven't got planning approval on some of these projects, actually, that is very little time. So this work is timely, because if it leads to a conclusion where we can progress projects with that grant allocation, that would be a great benefit, because we secure the allocation effectively. So thank you, and that's me.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I think I'm going to go call for questions. Right. Keep hands up. So Councillor Rice, Councillor Conti, Councillor Corday, Councillor Ball, Boomer, Councillor Mohammed, Councillor Wesson. Okay, we'll start with those few. So Councillor Rice first.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just refer to page 49 on the report here? It's that it mentions the sentence about the council has also identified land with potential for up to further 6,000 new homes. Can I just clarify on that one, if anyone would know, if that refers to affordable homes, or if it refers to homes in general, where affordable becomes actually just a one smaller part of the development? The reason why I'm asking this is one thing you find with me is I do have a bit of a fixation on land supply, and I'm just interested in just knowing what's going on with our land supply. We do have an awful lot of manifesto commitments which are related to land, not just housing. So I'm just thinking in terms of on top of the other costs that we're thinking about in terms of inflation, in terms of materials, in terms of staff, everything else. Is land an issue as well? Is there any reason why we might find ourselves having to pay a lot of money for land in order to ensure that we build the houses and the homes that we've promised? Thank you.
You want to go to that?
Are we doing them one by one? Yeah.
It's going to be so sporadic, I imagine, people's questions.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Yeah. Is land an issue? So I think I'll start by answering that question quite broadly. So the council's 4,000 generally affordable housing target was never set just for the council to deliver on council land. It was a target that took account of what was coming through the planning pipeline. So one of the things that we thought might happen in the last year or so, but thankfully hasn't happened, is there a slowdown in terms of what's coming through the planning system. But thankfully, despite some of the challenges, it's remained quite steady. But what we are seeing happening is developers, because they've got viability problems, seeking to negotiate lower levels of affordable housing with the council. So we are definitely seeing quite a bit of that happening. In terms of kind of land supply more generally, so we're bringing, in terms of council-owned land, we're bringing a report forward to Cabinet at the start of next year that is looking to introduce or get authority to bring forward new sites that aren't currently in our pipeline. And if we can get authority to proceed with those, then we will have sufficient land in order to meet our 4,000 target. Land that is owned and held by the council or public sector land is expected to achieve under planning policy 50% affordable housing. So the view taken by the mayor is if it's already public sector land, there shouldn't be the normal kind of acquisition cost, and the public sector should be kind of leading by example in the delivery of affordable homes. I think land more generally in the borough, that's really subject to the local plan that is due to go to full council in January. So what we have seen in the last 3 years is the council on average is not hitting its annual housing target of around 2,100 homes. So that does point towards potential problems in the marketplace in terms of developers being able to bring forward enough land. In order for a local plan to be approved, we've got to be able to demonstrate to an inspector that we've identified sufficient land in order to meet that annual target over the course of the plan, which is a 15-year plan. And we've got circa 80 sites, which we think, in addition to some small sites coming forward, that we will be able to achieve our target. So I guess the overall picture, I'd say, in terms of land supply from where we are now is actually in a reasonably good place.
Thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Conti, next.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions. The first one was about, you mentioned with the housing revenue account, there's a sort of a pool between spending money on sort of cladding, dealing with mold, etc., on the existing housing stock, and then obviously money to go towards development of new homes. I just wonder how do you balance that? What is there a priority of dealing with the current stock? Because obviously we want to make sure that residents who are already living here are in the best possible accommodation and the safest accommodation. So how does the council sort of try and balance those two things out? The second question was in terms of sort of the funding for Broadway Living. an element of that is council loans. So I was wondering how much has a council loaned to Broadway Living since its inception, and in terms of sort of money coming back in terms of fees, etc. How does that balance out over sort of that period? And my final question was, in terms of, you mentioned in terms of the viability, in terms of developments across the borough, that the housing developers are coming back and saying, well, you know, we want to reduce the number of affordable homes, etc. Obviously, you know, the whole point of this is to make affordable homes. And I just wonder, in terms of making sure that the projects continue to, you know, with all the pressures in terms of interest rates, etc., how do, with all the new sort of criteria that projects have to meet, do you think you'll get to a point where actually the bar's too high, that actually nothing's going to get over that threshold because of the number of risk and the number of sort of hurdles that needs to be jumped through? So how do you pitch the right level of risk that Broadway Living is prepared to take?
Okay, thanks. I'll deal with the first and third, and I'll ask Philip to perhaps come in on how much the council has loaned to Broadway Living. So I think to answer the question around how we're going to think about the investment in existing stock versus the development of new homes. So I think the first point I'll make on that is we are currently working on a housing strategy. So that housing strategy is destined to go to Cabinet in January of next year. And that will be the overarching strategic plan for housing in the borough. And that will set out 4 themes of focus, and it will help the council to think about prioritisation. So that's the first point to make, that we'll have that guiding document. I think secondly, the review is underway. So what I'm about to say is more speculation on my behalf, but rather than reflection of the conclusion of the review. But what I would expect to come through is that there are certain housing elements which the council cannot compromise on. And one of those will be fire safety. And another component which I expect we cannot really compromise on will be the health and safety of our residents. So where properties have got problems of mold, for example, you know, I expect the council will need to prioritise investment around the health and safety of our residents over the development pipeline. But that is, you know, like I said, that is a level of speculation on my behalf, because that review is still going on. I think your third question was about getting the right balance between protecting the council and stopping developments from happening altogether. So that we've asked a couple of independent development finance companies to help us set the hurdle rates, but we are looking at it both in a strategic way, but also on a site-specific way. So we are reflecting upon the application of those hurdle rates for the next phase of our pipeline that I referred to, that is coming forward in January. What that is showing is a number of our sites do remain viable. However, there are some that we would no longer look to develop ourselves. So in the scenario where the sites are not viable for the council to deliver, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not viable for another partner to deliver. So how we're thinking about sites that appear as though they're failing our hurdle rates for the council to deliver is we won't be giving up on those sites. I mean, firstly, you know, viability is always a reflection of a point in time. So a site that might not be viable for the council to deliver today may well be viable tomorrow as conditions improve. So, these sites will come forward. However, we will also be carrying out quite a comprehensive engagement of dialogue with our partners. So we held a affordable housing provider session a few weeks ago, where we invited some of the best and biggest housing associations in the whole country into Pittshangham Manor, where we hosted a event. And the purpose of the event was to say, this is a council that is open for business with partnerships. There are certain councils who only like to deliver everything themselves. I think Ealing is presenting itself as a council that is keen on delivering council housing, but is also comfortable working with registered providers to deliver homes. And I think, in periods of economic volatility, actually, the view I've taken as strategic director is we should be spreading out our risk. I'm not advocating that the council seeks to deliver everything internally, because that will be taken on a very big risk profile at a point in the market where conditions are really challenging. So it's about spreading risk, it's about working, it's about resources, it's about working in partnership. But some of those partners will be able to bring forward sites in a way that the council might not necessarily be able to. But I don't know if Philip's able to comment on how much the council has loaned to BL to date.
I certainly am, Peter. Thank you. So just a bit of history then. The council approved a loan agreement up to 400 million in parallel with the Broadway Living RP business plan, which was approved in November 20. And I believe the full council approved the loan facility in December 2020. There was then some work to pull together what was the first tranche of the Broadway Living RP programme that was approved in July 2021, and it required up to 100 million of loan from the council. Those projects largely proceeded. A couple are still being developed by the council to transfer into Broadway Living RP, and they make up the 360 odd homes that will complete the assets when they're finished, which was in the earlier slide. So further loans haven't been made because the second tranche of projects that were to go ahead in Broadway Living RP, which were approved in April 22, most of those were transferred into the HRA because, as I said earlier, they became unviable. So the lending to Broadway Living by the council is currently expected to be around 100 million once all of the projects in tranche 1 are fully funded and transferred into Broadway Living. And the way this works is the business plan for Broadway Living must comply with all the covenants in the loan agreement. The council included some specific covenants around loan to cost and loan to value and the payback time. So the business plan for Broadway Living RP ensures that all of that lending is repaid in full to the council, including the fees for development management services. All of that is repaid within 50 years. So there is no long-term cost to the council for that lending. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, I was going to follow up on the working with partners. You referred to the other providers. I think most of us are in wards with estate regeneration schemes, with partnerships with outside providers, and it's a mixed story in terms of quality. If it's a council build, it's our responsibility. We can manage that. How can we guarantee not just the safety elements, which Councillor Conti was referring to, but quality? Good building materials, good design, good projects. Where today I think it's a mixed story. My opinion.
Thank you. So I think the first thing I'll say to that is I'm a strong advocate of establishing a lessons learned culture. So something that I've spoken to the directorate about is, I think lessons learned should just be carried out a matter of course, particularly when projects come to an end, not just when people perceive things to go wrong. Even you can learn a lot when things go right as well. So I think with some of the projects that are underway or completed, I'm speaking to the team about how we can kind of review and reflect upon what has gone well and what hasn't. I think in terms of how you can lock in quality into a development, there are different things you can do, and it partly comes down to the structure of the agreement with the partner. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Firstly, what can determine quality is who's securing the planning permission. So where the local authority, for example, leads the planning permission prior to working with a partner, then we've obviously got control over that design process, and we could potentially lock in a design code with that development. So whichever housing association gets appointed, they'll have to work in accordance with a set of design principles which the council has got adopted. So that is one way in which you can lock it in. Secondly, you can lock it in through the tendering process and the contractual arrangement, but it depends upon depends upon the nature of the contract as to how much control you've got. Thirdly, what is considered to be good practice within the industry is insisting that the architects that prepare the original planning application are retained throughout the development. So why this is a really important point is what often happens on large developments is after planning, the architects get sacked, and then cheaper architects get appointed who are not invested in the scheme because they weren't the original architects, and that second firm of architects are effectively employed to value engineer out some of the quality that was while we approved the planning application in the first place, and some of that quality can then get eroded. So I think it's the retention of architects is something that I've spoken to the directorate will always be favouring. And then I think finally it's what we can do through planning. So what we currently have is a design review panel. What we don't currently have, but we are looking to bring in and establish, is an internal urban design team. And one of the roles and purposes of that internal urban design team will firstly to be working on providing design advice and guidance on all schemes that go through planning. So we've got professional urban designers who will be there to work with the architects appointed by the housing associations and the developers to improve the quality all the way through. So not just into planning, but also beyond. And then in my previous authorities, I've seen that work really well. And actually, I think it's actually pretty conventional within London authorities to have that type of in-house resource that we don't currently have, but we will be building over the coming weeks and months.
Great, thank you very much. I think Councillor Cordier is next.
Peter, page 14, 4D. In this report, you have stated about Buckingham Avenue project. I was going to say Palace. Buckingham Avenue project will be transferred to BLRP. And there are also other projects, Southall Car Park and Dean Gardens in West Ealing, which they will be transferred to BLRP. My question is, who has a responsibility of these projects at the moment? Who would be transferred from? Thank you.
I think I'll ask Philip to pick that up because he's been overseeing all of these projects, so he's closest to them.
Yes, thanks, Peter. Thanks, Councillor. The Broadway Living business plan included a range of projects in Tranche 1. Buckingham Avenue, Southall Market Car Park and Dean Gardens were all part of Tranche 1. The principle for those projects was the Council's general fund carried the initial cost of preparing planning applications and then tendering for developers, and then land was transferred to Broadway Living. So Buckingham Avenue, that process happened, and Buckingham Avenue is now in effect owned by Broadway Living RP. So it is the developer of that site. Southall Market Car Park and Dean Gardens didn't transfer and won't transfer until completion of those projects. So they are still being funded in the general fund. And this is being funded through a £36 million budget established in the general fund, I believe, in December 2020, when the loan agreement was agreed. And that fund is funding both those projects. And when they transfer at a price to be agreed at completion, then the payment from Broadway Living RP will refund the council the cost of development in the general fund. So the general fund recovers its cost. And in terms of looking after those projects, it's my team that delivers those projects on behalf of the council and through a service level agreement on behalf of Broadway Living. Thank you.
It's complicated, so it's good, lovely. Councillor Ball.
Yes, thanks, Chair. So just picking up on that last point, so the idea is that the construction costs will be recovered when they are eventually transferred, but surely that's dependent on the price at that point. So is there an absolute guarantee that they won't be the council won't end up losing money on that transaction? And then the other questions I was going to ask, the 5-year Broadway Living forecast at 4.1 on page 32 is funded by fees that are chargeable of over £3 million a year until 2026. So how realistic is that, considering everything we've heard from all the officers about how difficult it is to take many of these schemes forward through Broadway Living, at least in the current climate? You know, is that actually feasible anymore? Next question is, so you said Broadway Living has 44 homes in management and BLRP has 61. Have there been any other new units provided directly through the HRA like in the last financial year, or is that's the sum total of what the council has built recently? And then the final question was, so thinking about the large sizes of the loans, what would the average cost per home provided be if Broadway Living completes everything that's underway, but isn't able to do any more?
I'll ask Philip to lead and I'll come in after.
Okay, so there's quite a few questions there, Councillor. I will hopefully capture them all. In terms of cost for the Southall Market Car Park and Dean Gardens projects, you're right, there is no guarantee because the price is agreed at completion. And the other thing to say on this is that the administration of Henry, the contractor that went into administration about 4 months ago, they were delivering Dean Gardens. So that project is subject to a retender and then a recommencement of work. So it's delayed and it's estimated the cost will be higher than originally planned. So there is no guarantee the full cost will be recovered, but the council does have the ability to test the market for those projects. It's not absolutely committed to selling to Broadway Living, and it may be that the council can recover better value by selling the homes to another housing association and demonstrate best value in that way, but retain all the nominations. So that's one possible way through that. On fees, I believe the page you're referring to was in the Broadway Living Limited Business Plan, which was approved in February 21, where there was an assumption that Broadway Living Limited would capture fees from development activity. That's no longer happening because the TUPE didn't take place in 2021. The staff didn't transfer into Broadway Living Limited, and it's not charging fees to the council for any activity. It has no staff, and all the activity is still within the council, sitting in my team. And so what's happening is the other way around. The council is charging fees to Broadway Living RP, and those are capitalised onto the projects that are being developed, and so is the cost is recovered in that way. You also, Councillor, asked about how much has the council built. The council has a very substantial regeneration programme across 8 estates, which I'm also overseeing. And one of those estates, Southampton, which is, I'd say, the flagship project, delivers around a quarter of all affordable housing delivered in the borough in any one year. That's a partnership with Countryside and L&Q, a large regional housing association. And the total number of new homes across all our 8 active regeneration projects is around 9,000. And I say around because some of the future phases are still to secure planning approval, so that number isn't certain. And we have delivered a number of homes in addition to the homes in this report, but I don't, I'm sorry to say, have all the figures to hand, and we could provide that subsequent to this meeting. And the average cost per home, again, that will be available, and we can provide that after the meeting. Thank you.
Those figures, that's all right. Yeah. Sorry, Councillor. Just saying it would be useful to have those 2 figures afterwards. Thank you.
Great, that's all. Councillor Mohammed.
Thank you, Chair. My question is on page 12. There seem to be a series of audits that's been taken place, 2 in 2022 and another 2 in 2023. And on page 12, it says others are still relevant and require action. Can you clarify what that means? Thank you.
So we've, as the report notes, there has been a number of audits undertaken on Broadway Living. However, when I joined and kind of reviewed those audits, what I'd noted is that whilst we've done a lot of good work undertaking the audits, we haven't been so meticulous with implementing all the actions set out in those audits. So it was one of the reasons why I decided that we needed some additional resource, which is why we brought Oze on board to start working through some of those audit actions, which are really focused on how we can address governance and compliance issues that have been raised. So implementing those audit actions is a work in progress, but it is something I'm very keen to do, which is why I've identified some additional resource.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wesson.
Thank you, Chair. Sticking with the theme of audits that Councillor Mohammed picked up, I think page 3 of the cover paper indicates that there was an independent resource and skills audit that was carried out in June of this year. Seems to me that it's in effect a kind of health check, but I wonder if Peter or colleagues could just say something about the insight that that's provided, because it would seem to me that having the right people with the right skills is really critical to housing delivery in the borough.
Sure. Yeah. So we had an independent consultant carry out an audit, and how she approached it was she interviewed people both within the existing development team as well as some of the council support services that are working very closely, such as finance, legal, and property. I think some of the conclusions arising were, firstly, I think generally Philip has put together and led a strong set of kind of housing development professionals who have got really good multidisciplinary experience. I think points were raised around the level of resource versus the size and ambition of our program. And you know, Philip's mentioned earlier that the council's leading 8 estate regen projects. I'm not aware of any council in London is leading more than that. So just to put that in a degree of context, that is a really big program that we've got underway. So I think whilst we've got a good mix of skills, there are resource challenges that need to be addressed. I think, and as a result of that, there is risk to our ability to deliver our obligations under the GLA's affordable housing grant program. You know, I think, you know, we've got a brilliant allocation, but a number of the schemes that we were relying on have faced viability pressures. So we're in the place, which is what the January cabinet reports are going to talk about potentially not proceeding with certain projects, but alternatively proceeding with new projects. But as Philip has outlined, proceeding with new projects to achieve a start on site by March 26 is quite a considerable undertaking. So we are having to really think hard about whether we've got the right level of resource in order to accelerate across a number of new projects to try to avoid or certainly mitigate having to return grant back to the GLA. Because, you know, if any council cannot demonstrate to the GLA that they've got a affordable housing program that is capable of delivering against their obligations and milestones, then you always run the risk of the GLA seeking to reallocate money away from one council into other councils or housing associations who they think can deliver. So we are in the process of putting additional resource into the new business team, which is the team that will be heading up the early stages of the new projects, getting them through planning, getting them into contract in order to try to mitigate the risk that we've got with the GLA grant.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Weston's got a follow-up, but okay.
Thanks for that, Peter. I think you mentioned the fact that having 8 schemes at the same time is very ambitious. One of the schemes is obviously in mine and Councillor Bucklini's ward, which is Copley Close. You mentioned January's report will be about the viability. Is there anything you can say about the further phases of the Copley region?
Perhaps Philip will comment on that.
Yes, I can. Thank you. I'm sorry, my video is not. I go. The Copley Close project has got 3 phases to complete. Phase 3, which is on site and is a refurb, it's a fairly small phase that is about to complete. Work is ongoing on that small phase. Phase 5 is the refurbishment of 100 homes across 5 blocks, and that is at the advanced planning stage. I don't mean planning as in town planning, but I mean planning of the project. And that is anticipated to start in the summer of next year. We're about to tender for that project. And the remaining phase is what's called phase 7, which is the largest remaining phase. And I believe there are conversations about the cost of that phase, because the current budget, I think, allocates 40 million for that phase on the basis of it's being refurbished. But that budget was established, I believe, in 2018, and we're now undertaking a very detailed survey of the remaining homes on Copley in phase 7 to establish what work is required. And of course, since then, there's been a change in legislation around fire, and there's been changes to decent homes, and there's been substantial increases in build costs generally. So I anticipate the 40 million won't be enough to achieve what is required to be achieved in those homes, and a budget review would need to take place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rice is going to ask another question. Is there anyone else who hasn't asked a question? Would you like to ask anything? No? Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Chair. So I don't know if you necessarily have an answer for this. I just want maybe like an overall opinion of it. I'm looking at Brexit and the fact that we have lost a lot of workers who've gone back overseas. And I would, if I was in government or it has some kind of position, I would be, I would actually just see ahead and see the situation coming, and maybe want to think ahead and ensure that there are people within this country who are trained and got the skills that we need in order to be involved in building projects. I'm just wondering, do we have like an opinion or an assessment of how well the country's doing in terms of training new people in building skills in order to ensure that we can continue building into the future? Thank you.
Sure. So from what I can see within the industry, I don't see any, well, I'm not aware of any kind of like nationally coordinated program. I do see, however, a lot of really good localized programs happening. So there are a lot of local authorities, us including, who are really pushing the construction skills agenda within their locality. But there are also, a lot of developers who are actually taking the matters into their own hands and having to develop on-site construction skills academies in order to train up the next generation of construction workers. So it's, to put it in some context, it's, the situation has started to settle down now. So when I talk to developers and contractors, they're not kind of in the crisis situation that there might have been a year or so ago. So it has settled down, but there is a lot of emphasis on training up people. What was viewed as part of the solution, however, has suffered quite a number of high-profile setbacks, is what's kind of referred to in the industry as kind of modern methods of construction, or kind of like off-site manufacturing. However, or another way of thinking about that is actually kind of automation of the construction industry. That hasn't really taken hold within the industry. So there's a number of high-profile examples where developers and contractors have invested in factory facilities in order to generate these off-site homes. The problem is, let's say you need 1,000 people to operate the factory. You can never guarantee a continuous supply of homes going through your factory, because it's always down to being able to buy sites and get them through planning, which we all know is not always reliable. So a lot of them have actually gone bust. What a lot of developers, however, do is take a more hybrid approach, where what you often see on large developments is bathroom or kitchen pods getting craned in. So they won't build the whole of the development in a factory, but they quite often build certain components within a factory and then crane them in. So I think that combination of that kind of that hybrid approach is keeping the kind of construction industry moving forward.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Ball.
Yeah, so the report mentions tax implications, and you were saying that's one of the issues with doing it as a limited company, and there are possible different ways that would avoid that. But can you explain how the corporation tax liability arises now that the original service fee model isn't happening? And do you have any feel for the amount of the tax liability that's likely to arise?
I'm not sure if Philip or Jose are able to talk to that point.
I can have a go at this. I have to say to start that I'm not a tax consultant. We would always get advice on tax from the appropriate consultancy. But the tax arises through trading activity. Broadway Living RP would pay tax when it makes a profit on sale of shared ownership, for instance. And so the model doesn't have any tax payments in the early years of the business plan. But as shared ownership is initially sold, the first tranche equity is sold, and then future phases are staircased out, then there are tax liabilities. And when the business plan was put together back in 2020, the 1,500 home program had tax liabilities of around, I think, 30 million, but I could confirm that. And there were conversations with the portfolio holders of housing at the time around how this might be mitigated, and we did seek some advice on it, and the advice was that we couldn't mitigate it with the current corporate structure, and we'd need to change the corporate structure. And Community Benefit Society was one thing that was suggested, because the tax there, the company is treated as a quasi charity in terms of tax, so it doesn't have a tax liability, but there would be changes of governance, and it would be quite a piece of work to put it into effect. But as the business plan as the program has reduced, the tax liability is also reduced. That 30 million that I mentioned is no longer the tax liability that BLRP faces, but it does have some tax liability in its business plan. Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, I think that's it. So no more questions. So it's just left to us to agree the recommendations in the report. It's on page 11. So it's to note the changes in Broadway Living's business plan arising out of a harsher economic and operational climate for the development of affordable housing across the country. We agree to note that. Note the ongoing transformation activities that will impact on Broadway Living's future business plans. Agreed. And then to note the various reviews, policy work that will strengthen controls and reduce risk across the entire development process. Right, lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Jose. Jose, we aren't asked any questions, but thank you. This is a very helpful contribution. Right, lovely. So we'll go on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Scrutiny Annual Report, which you've circulated. I think Sam's going to speak to it.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. Very pleased to present this today. This really came about through it's long overdue. Firstly, it came around through the statutory review of statutory guidance on the operation of scrutiny in local authorities back in 2019. And I think we used to do a version of this many years ago. I think in a way, for the last few years, when we've been operating a model of running the scrutiny panels that take a subject, they look at it in depth, and they present a final report at the end of the year, kind of made this kind of report redundant previously, because you could see the result of each panel's work at the end of each year. It'd go to cabinet, it had a lot of visibility. But with the changing of the model that we're pursuing and not taking that approach necessarily anymore, there was a bit of a gap, I think, in sort of having something we can take to other members, take to the members of the public, and show to everybody what overview and scrutiny does in Ealing. So really, this report is an attempt to really just briefly summarise the impact that scrutiny's had over the last year, the things he's been getting up to, and the value it's generated to the value it's given to the authority through the work it's done. And so this is the first attempt at doing it in this way. As I say, kept it fairly brief. It doesn't cover everything, all the wonderful things that all the committees have got up to over the last year, but it does give us a good grounding in it. And the idea is this will go to council every year after being approved by OSC, and it will just make sure that everyone in council is aware, in full council, all the members are aware of all the work that Scrutiny is doing, raises Scrutiny's awareness in its profile, and make sure that you know, I know we're lucky to have a very extensive Scrutiny function in Ealing, so we have a lot of backbench members that are sitting on Scrutiny panels, but you can't possibly all sit in all of them, as much as you might want to do that and get involved in all of it. So it's just a really brief summary of everything that's gone on in the last year, if that's even possible to do. So it's presented here for you all. I've got the chairs of all this year's panels, although I know this covers last year's activity. So there's an opportunity here for you to, if you want to make any changes, and again, there is an opportunity here if you want to delegate me to make some changes before it goes to full council. If any of the chairs of this year's panels or even chairs of last year's panels want to make some comments on the content in there, we can do that. And I think all we'd need to do then is get the chairs forward and take it to council in December. So I'd welcome any comments or suggestions. And just to reiterate, it's a work in progress, in terms of how we're doing this. So, we can always do things differently next year if we want to. So it's something we're trying out and introducing, which is recognised as best practice. Thanks.
Thanks, Sam. Did you say for December's?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so really soon.
Yeah, deadline's quite short. Publishing in a couple of weeks. So,
thank you, Sam. Any comments, questions? Anderson.
Thank you. I think it's a really good report. I think it's a worthwhile exercise. It's kind of in our own minds crystallizing what it is that we're actually trying to achieve. I guess my only comment really would be on the timing of the report, and I guess something to kind of obviously to consider and us to consider as members for the next year. I'm kind of conscious that it's been nearly 6 months since the last municipal year, and I guess, is there a, notwithstanding workload and other kind of priorities, is there a way we could perhaps bring it forward to a summer full council, just so it doesn't so it feels like it's a bit not out of date. And I guess as a kind of potential build on the report, there's also, we could also consider, I guess, kind of a forward look as to what we're actually going to do. This is what we've done this year, and actually this is what we've identified as areas where there are gaps in scrutiny of certain cabinet or officer decisions. But as a principle, I think it's a really good report. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. I quite agree. I think, and it sort of chimes in with the fact that last year's scrutiny panels we are still haven't gone through the system yet, so they're coming to the next cabinet meeting and the one before. But this is a start, so I think we can do things more nimbly for next year. Councillor Weston.
Totally agree with those comments about timings. I was going to say in terms of I know earlier in the year we actually asked the public for their views in terms of the scrutiny programme. Obviously sending it to council's great. I just wondered if we could do some comms activity to close the feedback loop with the public, to say, actually, these are the things that you've come to us with in terms of suggestions and ideas, and this is what the scrutiny function's done. So it'd be really good to get some comms around that.
Thank you. And then that links into thinking about next year. I mean, we're now more than halfway through this municipal year. Before we know where we are, we've got to really start thinking about topics and structures for the next year. But nothing's in place yet, but we need to start those conversations over the next few weeks. Any other comments? Great. Thank you very much. So happy to approve the report to go forward? Yeah. Lovely. Thank you very much. Final item is then the work programme. You'll see that January's meeting is scheduled to be a call-in meeting only. We'll see if there's going to be a call-in. But what we will be doing is then trying to do the budget workshops, which we were hoping to do last month, if you remember. But by January, we should have a bit more concrete information to do some work. So it won't be a formal OSC meeting. We really will try and make it into a workshop discussion group. So it's not going to be a minuted formalized meeting, but it'd be good if you could keep your diaries clear for that just straight after New Year. And then we've got the actual main budget scrutiny, which will be in February. And then you can see the rest of the items, which can still change and we'll still juggle things. But hope you approve that. Councillor Driscoll.
Because we used to have a tracker of recommendations and they were implemented, not implemented, part implemented, where they were going. So just seeing how that would fit in with the.
Yeah, sorry, been a bit of delay in getting that to you this year. I will commit to bringing that to the next proper scrutiny meeting as part of the work programme. So you can review that and see where we are with things.
Right, thank you. So everyone happy with that? That's great. Well, thank you very much. End of the meeting. Thank you very much. See you in January.